Well, good afternoon. I'm John Sangenberger. I lead the Alumni Relations Office at the Tepper School. We're so glad to welcome you to our last in our series of 4 webinars on the intelligent future, highlighting the interdisciplinary research initiatives of the Tepper School. Today's discussion will be on the intelligent future of healthcare. It's also Carnival Weekend on campus and Reunion Weekend on campus, and we have alumni joining us from all over the world. It's an exciting time, a little cooler day than we would have liked, but the sun is shining right now. So glad to have all of our students and alumni with us. Well, before we begin, let me introduce a couple of our other upcoming programs. We do have our WML Mellon Speaker Series beginning again, and it's available online for you with Revathi Advaithi, who is the CEO of Flex, and now she'll be on April 13th. So look for that invitation as well. And then we're starting to think about our summer programming, and we've got the machine learning with Professor Zach Lipton. We know that's an interesting area for many of our alumni, and we're looking forward to having Zach join us for that. But last but not least, we're excited about our 2 in-person Tepper Alumni Reunion Weekends coming up in April and in May. Registration has already began in early March, and we've got a lot of alumni planning to come back. So we hope that you will join us. It's going to be an exciting time in person for the first time in 3 years. So glad to have our alumni coming back and seeing our beautiful campus. Now, to introduce the Tepper School's role in leading the intelligent future, please welcome Linda Argotti, who is our Senior Associate Dean for Faculty and Research and the Thomas Lord Professor of Organizational Behavior and Theory, also the Director of the Center of Organizational Learning, Innovation, and Knowledge at the Tepper School, one of our strong faculty members who has been here for many years. Join me in welcoming Linda Argotti. Professor Argotti.
Thank you, John. I'd like to add my greetings and welcome to John's. Thank you for joining us for the final webinar of the Intelligent Future series. Here at the Tepper School, we focus on building and teaching about a better future for business. We call it the Intelligent Future. As you may have learned from our other webinars, a large part of our journey to the Intelligent Future includes the Tepper School's interdisciplinary initiatives, which include blockchain, healthcare, inclusive growth and prosperity, and sustainability. These initiatives unite researchers, students, donors, alumni, and industry to advance understanding of important topics and how they shape business and society. This webinar series has explored each of these interdisciplinary initiatives with Tepper School faculty and alumni leaders in their respective domains. We've looked at blockchain with Professor Ariel Zetland-Jones, sustainability with Professor Nicholas Muller, and inclusive growth and prosperity with Professor Ali Shuraday. These faculty experts, along with an exceptional panel of alumni, have inspired us with insightful thoughts and discussion in these areas. In today's session, we delve into our healthcare initiative, which is headed by Professor Soo-Haeng Cho. The Tepper Healthcare Initiative supports and showcases the research advances, educational endeavors, thought leadership, entrepreneurship, and industry partnerships of Tepper School faculty, students, and collaborators in the healthcare and health tech domains. So now let us turn to today's session. Soo-Haeng Cho, Professor of Operations Management and Strategy and Director of the Healthcare Initiative, will moderate the discussion alumni leaders who are at the forefront of the intelligent future of healthcare. Thank you again for joining us and joining us throughout the webinar series. Soo-Haeng, I'll turn the discussion over to you now.
Right. Thank you, Linda, for the nice introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It has been my pleasure to lead the healthcare initiative in the past few years. Let me first tell you briefly about various activities of the initiative and then move on to the panel discussion. So 2 years ago, with a generous gift from the Vertex Pharmaceutical, we created the Tepper Healthcare Initiative Fund. And using this fund, we have supported various activities in the initiative. And on the educational side, we launched the new MBA Healthcare Analytics concentration in our MBA program in fall 2020. On the research side, we have funded 5 PhD student and faculty projects topics range from well-being of patient transporters to split liver transplantation, opioid addiction, and so on. And the initiative also supported the activities of the TEPR Healthcare Club. And for example, last fall, we had the first healthcare case competition. And 11 teams participated in the competition, and 3 people from Vertex and I judged the competition. And coming forward, we plan to host a national level healthcare case competition. For alumni and outreach activities, Ashley Krudzinski, the Director of Corporate Relations, and I hosted 2 healthcare industry roundtables last year. And we invited the industry leaders and alumni working in this industry to increase awareness around this healthcare initiative. So the theme of today's webinar is the intelligent future of healthcare. Today, as you know, innovative technology is transforming all aspects of healthcare, from screening to diagnosis, treatment, monitoring, and patient education. Just to name a few, telehealth has made it possible for patients to receive care without in-person office visit. And we'll continue to see more predictive analytics in healthcare based on artificial intelligence and machine learning. But the lack of patient data sharing across providers will be one of the biggest challenges to overcome. And technology will also affect the way patients, doctors, and medical staff interact and collaborate with each other. But not everyone is tech savvy. So in fact, some patients may be adverse to using any technology in any form, and some doctors may be slow in adopting new technology. So with these various issues in mind, I like to transition to the panel discussion. So I'd like to introduce our 3 faculty members who have expertise in this area. They will talk about their related work and share their thoughts on the intelligent future of healthcare. First, Thea Quinn is an associate professor of organizational behavior and business ethics. And Thea's research focuses on applying ideas and insights from organizational behavior and psychology to improve collaboration and manage conflict effectively in medical teams. And the TEPR Healthcare Initiative Fund supported her research with a doctoral student, Matt Diabetes, about the impact of well-being on the collaboration of patient transporters. So next, William Kegler is our MBA alum, and he is also the founder of Soba Sage, which reinvents sleep therapy using machine learning technologies. He is also an assistant teaching professor of entrepreneurship at the TEPR School. So finally, Sudha Tayur is the 4th Distinguished Research Chair and University Professor of Operation Management. And his research explores various issues in the US healthcare ecosystem, including organ transplantation, medical AI application, and designing AI-augmented healthcare delivery systems. And the TEPR Healthcare Initiative Fund supported his research with the doctoral student, Savannah Teng, about optimal learning in split liver transplantation. So the agenda for the rest of today's webinar is as follows. I will first ask each panelist to briefly tell us their related work on healthcare. Then panelists can freely share their thoughts about the future of healthcare. And finally, we will have some time for Q&A from alumni and audience from this webinar. So now I will start from Thea about the brief introduction of her research on healthcare.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So as Soo-Haeng mentioned in the introduction, I focus in my work on applying ideas from organizational behavior and specifically around collaboration and conflict to helping medical teams work together better, especially in the area of interprofessional collaboration, having providers who have different areas of expertise, come together to be able to make decisions, to be able to interact with patients, help patients make decisions more effectively. how I got into working in this area was interesting. It was a faculty member over at the University of Pittsburgh in the Department of Critical Care Medicine contacted me some years ago and shared that a big challenge in medicine is working together with providers with different areas of expertise. And he was thinking about ICU settings. And he thought that there was a lot he could learn and the field could learn of medicine from studying teams and especially teams in other organizations, and organizational behavior as a field has studied teams in all different contexts and trying to discern what we know from teams in other areas. How can we apply that towards healthcare, where this is a big challenge? And so that's led to some collaboration over the years of exploring things related to sort of leader inclusiveness and psychological safety, right? How do you get team members to speak up when they notice problems? You know, if they notice that an evidence-based practice isn't being followed, how can we encourage nurses or respiratory therapists or other members of the medical team to voice their opinions and share that information? And so I've been working in the ICU setting and also working with others to talk about medical team decision making with end of life decisions and communicating with families in terms of family meetings and how can we foster better collaboration and communication in these contexts. Thank you.
Okay, so next will be Will Kegler. Will?
Thank you. Yep, thank you. So nice to meet you all. My background is I'm actually a mechanical engineer and an alumni from Carnegie Mellon MBA program in '97. I am a member of the faculty. I teach entrepreneurship at Tepper, but I am a practicing entrepreneur. Soo-Haeng is my fourth startup. Most of my career has been spent in the home healthcare and specifically the sleep apnea space. I've actually been in that space since 1990 in various forms, from the medical device side and also doing software startups in this space. I got involved with my latest startup actually after selling my startup called MedSage Technologies to Philips. I joined the faculty at CMU and was surrounded by these brilliant students that we have here at this school, particularly in the area of machine learning and computer vision, and realized that there was an application for this technology in my kind of passion space, which is sleep apnea. But what I've done in sleep apnea in this latest startup is really indicative of opportunities across all of healthcare, right? So the healthcare space, particularly in the United States, is incredibly inefficient with multiple conflicting incentives and inefficiencies, a plethora of inefficiencies, right? So Soo-Haeng utilizes artificial intelligence and computer vision to automate the clinical process used to in-service and bring patients who are suffering from a disease called obstructive sleep apnea onto their primary therapy, which is continuous positive airway pressure, or CPAP. And we have automated that process and made it not only more efficient, but more effective. The metric we like to use that's easiest to point to is that, and this might be shocking to some of you, is that today with the traditional process, 1 out of 4 CPAP patients fail in their first try with CPAP therapy. With our technology, it's actually less than 5%. So it's a 4x plus improvement. And it's all due to the use of artificial intelligence and computer vision, which has some unique challenges that I'm happy to talk about later because it's so new and there really wasn't data. We had to generate our own data. But the utilization of this type of technology can be expanded far beyond just the vertical I'm in today. The opportunity to transform our healthcare system is one of the most important things we can be doing right now as a citizen of this country. So I'm happy to be involved and happy to talk about it.
Thank you, Will. So next is Sridhar.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Hope you can hear me fine. I think of my work in healthcare in three buckets. At the very top is, can we influence national policy? In particular, I am quite deeply involved in the liver allocation and other organ allocation policies in the United States. Some of my work has been sought out by the national academies as they write their recommendations for the committees to look at. I have participated in public comments on upcoming policy changes and discussions. And all of this is informed, doing analysis of data and trying to balance, between efficiency and fairness. A specific example in liver transplantation is Asian women, for example, are 25% less likely to get transplanted in the US compared to, let's say, a standard issue male. And it is not something that people want to be unfair about. It is the physicality or the biology of the situation. And therefore, for the last couple of years, there have been increasing demands to improve fairness. And one of the activities that we have done at Carnegie Mellon, in particular, working with UCSF, which is a leading transplant center in the US, is to propose some changes that are being discussed at the national policy level. So just to give you some example of something concrete, we want to use data to help inform discussions at the national committee level. So that's one bucket. The second bucket, probably much closer to my operations management type life, is how to improve existing activities, operations, especially in hospitals. And as many of you know, in the US, readmissions into hospitals is a big issue. And insurance has been cracking down on them by saying that they will not reimburse hospitals if a patient is readmitted for same or similar disease code within the 30 days. So there is a challenge about how much is the hospital responsible for it and how much of it is the patient, and are the rules by the insurance to penalize hospitals fair or not fair. So UPMC contacted us along with an MBA student who is also a physician, and we did a project to understand better what are the readmission statistics, and we use machine learning to understand better whether the current policies that are used to measure UPMC are fair or not in the context of the demographics, for example, in our Pittsburgh region. So that's a second concrete example where we take data, we use some machine learning algorithms, and then we inform the insurance company as well as the providers, in this case UPMC, to look at the readmissions. The third part, which I suppose is the most exciting aspect of things, is what new technologies, what new service, what can we do that's new, that's not out there, that we want to bring to the table. And something that I've looked at in the last few years is liquid biopsy. This is the holy grail of the holy grail in terms of cancer. Is can we take some blood? I don't want you to think, oh my God, he's doing Theranos again. No, this is not Theranos, okay? Is to take blood, and then there's something called cell-free DNA that's in the blood. And when you do the analysis of the cell-free DNA, if you are likely to get cancer, the signature is there. And so you might have seen in the news multi-billion-dollar investments being made in Grail and others about trying to see if there can be very, very early signal for cancer detection. So liquid biopsy is one area where, again, we have looked at data that's available in Cosmic, which is generally available data about cancer mutations and such, and recent work with Andrew Lee and others in OR and Zach the name was mentioned before, and my PhD student, Kira, we have now improved algorithms to say we can detect, with higher fidelity with less data. So that's a third example where we're using data, machine learning techniques, advanced machine learning techniques, advancing something called adaptive sequential hypothesis testing. And our goal would be to make liquid biopsies more practical sooner. So those are three big buckets where we use data basically to inform, hopefully a better healthcare system moving forward.
All right, thank you, Thea, Will, and Sridhar for your brief introduction of your own research. I know you can spend a lot more time than this, but we have a set of questions from alumni and from the audience. So I will start from some very general question about the opportunities and challenges. So when you talk about the intelligent future of healthcare, what do you see the biggest opportunities and biggest risk or challenges to success and improvement? Can anyone pick up this general question?
So I could certainly get us started. And I'll pick on the second half of your question first, which is, what are the challenges? For me, the biggest challenge that we faced was data, access to good and quality data, which is so essential for the proper application of machine learning approaches. And in our case, we actually had to develop a product that would generate the data that we needed to power our algorithm. And that takes time. We spent probably close to 3 years just generating the data that would be used to power the algorithm to create the value. So, when you look at other technologies and other processes in healthcare, you have capital related to devices and processes. In this particular case, the big investment in many cases is generating the proper data to power the algorithm to give the outcome that you're looking for, whether it's efficiencies and improvements in clinical outcomes in our case, or other outcomes depending upon the application.
Okay, thank you. In fact, one of the questions from the audience was about the data. The question from the audience said, suggestion on handling the first step problem of getting doctors to add even more data onto patient charts. For example, gender identity is a strongly desired data point, but is rarely ever entered. And also I mentioned in the introduction that data collection and data sharing across provider is a really big challenge, especially with the HIPAA. A lot of regulation about handling patient data. So any further thought about the data issues?
I think it's an interesting question because each of us comes from our own unique perspective and lens. We see different parts of the problem. So it's interesting for me to hear Will speak about the data, and for me, coming from thinking about the behavioral science and the people, I see the issues of what are people doing with the data and how do people communicate about the data, whether it's about the data entry from the questions, or once we have the information, how can it be utilized best? And I can say from my perspective, a lot of what the work I do in this area is in the area of teaching physicians, healthcare professionals in the area of negotiation, conflict management, collaborative problem solving. And this is a big challenge of each member has access to different data, each person in the healthcare system, and yet they need to sort of use this data in a way that can improve the decision making. And so I think whether it's the integration of humans with machines, so you're taking what we're learning from the machine learning and things, or just each healthcare professional or hospital administrator, or people having access to different data. And of course, the healthcare systems, the patient charts don't communicate with one another. And there's big policy issues sort of related to that and patient privacy. But I think this idea of integrating the information, whether that's at a human level or with the technology and the machines, is a big challenge. and information such as gender identity. I mean, thinking about how does that information get into the system, and asking doctors to do that, people who have high levels of expertise when they're already doing a lot of administrative work, is probably not going to be the most efficient use of resources or best use of resources, and it's going to be a challenge because it's one more task added on to many. And so thinking about how can we create these systems that more seamlessly share information, so and that people can use it in a more effective way, I think is there's a lot of opportunities there.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that. My experience is when you ask a physician or any clinical individual to generate data for you, you're not likely to get it, right? They're too busy, especially in today's day and age. So you have to build a scenario where the generation of that data produces value for them to incent them to participate. And they're not going to just do it because it's helpful for your product or for the solution you're trying to create. It has to generate some value in itself, and the data is almost a byproduct of that activity. That's been my experience. Or the data already exists, and the problem is that the data doesn't always exist, or it's only partially in existence, in which case the quality of the data can be suspect.
All right. So we talk about the data issue so far. Maybe the next question is a follow-up from the alumni. So do improvements in technology ensure increased accuracy in diagnosis? What are some barriers that would prevent adoption of AI or machine learning in diagnosing patients? I think Sridhar's research is directly relevant to this. Maybe Sridhar, can you speak about this, maybe?
Yeah. So I think there are multiple issues here, and it's, I think, a pressing issue. So thanks for asking. Let's break it down into many things. We are talking about AI, ML for medical decision making, not just process improvement. Okay, so I think the process improvement parts are probably more easily, somewhat adaptable. But when you say that I have now an improved diagnostic tool, improvement to what? Let's say improvement to a human doctor. We are running into the following questions. First, people don't fully understand the interpretation of the ML algorithms. There could be an overfit of data, so there's a general reluctance to accept a black box output. And so the best we can hope for is not a replacement to a human doctor, but let's say an augmentation. So let's say we give that part. But you run into a problem there. Now suppose the AI ML system says a diagnostic is X. And now the physician who has an expertise doesn't believe it, or they have a Y. And then what happens? Are they forced to take the AI ML answer? Or are they supposed to give their own response too? Suppose their response was Y, but it turned out later it was actually X. Will they get sued because they didn't listen to AI? What if the other way around? They go with X, but it turns out to be Y. Will they get sued because they didn't do their job and anybody can just look at AI, ML results? So what we are seeing here is this is a fairly tricky situation because one, any of these statistical methods have possibilities of error. Two, these things are not fully interpretable and may have an overfit. And three, because of the residual uncertainty that's there and the fact that after the fact, a result might show one way or the other, there's a lot of hesitancy among the physicians in even looking at the augmentation. Forget the replacement, the augmentation part. So I think these are some real things that we need to consider. It's not just about the fact that I got this very nice little black box. It's the fact that the black box is never perfect. And given that imperfection, we have to, I think, talk through is there going to be a nationally approved process? Is there going to be a limitation of liability? I think those types of things actually come up, and I think that's what makes it tricky and somewhat interesting.
Thank you, Sridhar. So I totally agree. I mean, interpretation from the predictive analytics is very subjective to some degree. I think some areas probably radiologists, for example, are more standardized, and then patients probably willing to accept more. But other areas probably kind of tricky, whether can I believe those results or not?
And it's also the case, I mean, I think radiology, we have progressed it, the community has come along. I think it has a 99.9999% type, accuracy. And there is a very strong agreement between what a human radiologist would do and what the ML does. So in some sense, that could be an example of, well, when things do well, it looks something like that. But I think the tricky parts are when we don't have the data, when it's not clear that this black box has not overfitted. It's a statistical result. I think this is almost, in some sense, brings up this issue. If ML is based on lots of data and on statistics, and we are trying to do personalized medicine, which is, hey, Soo-Haeng, what does it mean to you? So now if I can say, look, I found a lot of people like you, Soo-Haeng, obviously not you, but a lot of people like you, and it's like this. And so I think there is an inbuilt tension between, creating the statistical models and trying to look at the whole you. So I think when they do personalized medicine, they want to bring up the details of your, let's say, genomic sequence and things like that to some extent. But there's also this issue of you need to treat the whole patient, not just that symptom or that little piece. So what happens to the very old days when the physician knew you and knew the whole you, in terms of your mental wellness, your social situation, what other stress might be happening in your life. Of course, today they have this genomic information, but have they lost the whole you when they're getting molecular information? So I think people want to have the best of everything together. You want detailed information, but the whole you. You want the statistical information using machine learning, but not over extrapolate from it. And I think it is a tricky situation to put all of these things together.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point to think of when people will or will not be receptive to decisions made assisted by technology. And it reminds me of the related question in medicine is, like, when do physicians or patients, when are they more receptive to evidence-based practices? And there's sometimes resistance there, I think, for some of the same reasons, Sridhar, that you're mentioning, that if an evidence-based practice, even if there's clear evidence for sort of general population or for a specific thing, if it's experienced by either the physician as not understanding the holistic situation of this one particular patient, then similarly it wouldn't be applied. And so thinking about where this could go in the future, to the extent that medicine can become very personalized, and it's not just these general blanket evidence-based decision or practice in one area, but for a person very similar to you and, as many dimensions as could be captured or matched, I think that would certainly increase receptivity to people wanting to use the technology.
And the trade-off again, Taya, is if I find people very close to you, I don't have the sample size. And if I need the sample size, well, I need somebody taller than you, and and so then the question is, but then you're not like me. So I mean, you can't have it both ways, right? And so we get into this business. And by the way, you can add many variables, you can get data. I mean, the human being is more than 127 different variables or whatever variables you want. So in the end, in the olden days, and we think a physician is looking at the whole you, taking all the different data points and saying, putting it all together based on my training, my judgment, and the fact that I know you and something about your situation, this is the final decision I'm making, right? So the final decision is still that holistic understanding of things, right? And so I think to the extent that people can understand that AI, ML, and data-driven methods can support that holistic physician-patient interaction, I think that's going to be its best case situation. because medicine, all said and done, is not really a science, right? It is at the end of the day, it is still a bit of the art.
Yeah, I'll just layer on one other thing to this, and that is, and we definitely faced this issue with Soo-Haeng, right? We were building a tool that was, to some extent, enhancing the decision-making process of a clinician. To do that, number one, you get a lot of resistance to it. Number two, you really have to do it in stages. You have to do it and develop it as a decision support, decision enhancement tool that provides transparency for how you're making those decisions, not only because that helps the clinicians accept it, be more accepting to it and more confident in it, but the other part of it that we haven't mentioned yet is the regulatory side, right? So if you try to create a tool that uses machine learning technology to replace a clinician's judgment, that is a very difficult step to make. On the other hand, if you can make a tool that enhances their decision-making capability, perhaps makes it more accurate, makes it more efficient, and by the way, if they disagree with it, that can play back into the algorithm as well, right? If you're monitoring the outcome of that decision-making process, then you will eventually get to that, right? And that's part of the challenge of this approach to healthcare is you have to take it in phases, and it takes time and it takes a lot of data.
Yeah,
and during these stages, why should a patient or a physician take the risk of quote unquote mismatch, right, between the machine answer and the human answer, right? Right? Because you need to explain it too, right? And so, for example, when I speak to some of the UPMC oncologists, they say, what would be good is for us to get these are the top 4 reasons, unranked or something, and so that we don't forget that there is something else that's going on because we picked only 2. But then leave it to us to figure out which one of the 4 it could be. Because if you start ranking them, or if you're saying this is a higher probability and so on and so forth, they start getting very uncomfortable because it takes away their autonomy, actually, of doing things. And back to what I said first, what if they fundamentally believe it's something else? And everything has some probability of being right or wrong. They would rather not have this kind of information kind of basis available to them.
So by the way, we are getting lots of questions from the audience live. I don't think we have time to get to all these questions, but I like to pick a few ones that are, I think, relevant to all of us. I think this is one question from Ed Harrington. The healthcare system is fractured across providers, payers, manufacturers, service providers, and without an incentive system to better collaborate around better patient outcomes. So his question is, any work being done to bring the digital AI and human elements together to collaborate better across the discrete part of the healthcare system? I think this is kind of important question to address in the future of healthcare. So any thought about this integration or collaboration across different parties? Any panelists?
I think it's an excellent question, and I think it's a real problem. In my experience, and at least the physicians and the providers that I've been working with, it seems it's challenging enough to facilitate collaboration, even within to people they're seeing every day, with let alone sort of these broader set of stakeholders. And so I'm personally not aware of much work being done to in a systematic way to sort of bring these things together, but I think it's a huge problem. Now others may be aware of other efforts, but I've seen increasing interest in over the years. I mean, certainly the last 5-10 years or so that I've been working in this area, where there is a desire among the physicians, healthcare administrators for this to happen, but there's not a lot of systems in place or incentives that are making it happen better or more quickly from what I can see.
I'll just add, from my perspective, I think there's an amazing amount of work being done in specific areas within healthcare. I mean, even within the sleep apnea space, our tool is coordinating incentives between the sleep doc, the patient, the durable medical equipment provider, the manufacturer, and those decision-making tools run throughout. And that's one very narrow sliver of the healthcare space, right? And there's many projects that are doing similar things in other areas of healthcare. Do they go macro across this entire space? I mean, I think that's one of the problems that this space offers as a challenge is that, what is it? I forget the number right now. What percentage of GDP is healthcare, right? It's huge. And so, my approach is solve a problem and create value and then move on to the next. And sooner or later, we'll get there. You eat an elephant one bite at a time, you might say.
That's really fascinating to hear your perspective, because in some ways it's hopeful, but it also then reinforces the part of the question about there's all these discrete parts of the system. And I think what you say resonates. Like there's certain areas that, and you're seeing those where there's a lot of progress being made to connect things. But then, at least from the experience I've had with largely in the ICU setting and things, and this. I haven't seen it through my experience, and my guess is healthcare is very much like that way, where lots of advances on a particular area toward a particular problem on one area, and it's not being diffuse across even within one healthcare system. And I'd say that's the other thing I've seen. There's vast differences between different healthcare systems, between different hospitals within a healthcare system, and so it's an interesting issue about how learning from one area could be then applied to other areas so it's not people reinventing the same thing in different pockets.
I agree. I mean, the old adage from my mentor is do something that you can actually do, right? And sometimes that means narrowing the scope and focusing.
There is this trade-off, right? I mean, the US has always believed in autonomous, decentralized, aka fragmented, competitive, do your thing. And if Mayo feels it's the right thing for Mayo to do, let Mayo do it. And UPMC may or may not do it, right? And similarly, even at a very basic level, I'm on the board of directors of Heritage Valley Health System, which is a small community hospital here, right, which is part of my, local, philanthropic service. And we have 3 hospitals. The Soo-Haeng one is not unionized. The Butler one is unionized. What we can implement in Soo-Haeng is not what we can implement in Butler. So, forget the fact that we are 1/6 of the multi-trillion-dollar economy is healthcare. I mean, Heritage Valley Health System is only $600 million, which is tiny, right? I mean, UPMC is like 12 billion. 15 billion, right? So it's only 600 million, and you take each of these pieces, which could be 300 million, 200 million, and Kennedy's 100 million, and you say, come on, man, this is small enough for you to play. No, but Butler is union. This is not union. So why don't you have the same processes? Well, it's going to take time because you need to get the union agreement, to go with it. So I think what I've learned from this is first, as you said. 1/6 of trillions of dollars is trillions of dollars. So you cannot to expect that you can just roll this baby out. I mean, maybe you can do it in Singapore because it's like a well-controlled, well-oiled machine. Maybe right? Maybe you can push it to some parts of Germany, and people will follow it. The United States, it has to be mostly by people choosing to do it with a few kind of a push. So your view that people in specific areas of expertise or specific systems will take faster than others, and others may or may not catch up, I think is kind of the reality of the situation.
All right. Very active conversation. I think everyone will enjoy. So let me actually switch gears slightly based on one question I have about the policy. So we haven't really talked about the government role so far. I mean, it's very as Sridhar mentioned, it's a highly decentralized system in the here. So here's a question from the anonymous attendee. With the ever-changing healthcare policy landscape in America, how do teams and institutions design system product research that will last? Have you ever run into issues in your own work due to policy changing too rapidly or not rapidly enough? So let's talk about healthcare policy, really.
Yeah, I mean, the work in policy I'm involved with, as I said, is in the organ allocation business. And there have been some changes, some reversal of those changes and reversal of the reversal of those changes. When they say quickly, it means every few years. That means, I've been doing this for about 10 years. So I've seen maybe a change happen like 3 times. Okay. And that would be considered reasonably quick, from a national policy perspective. And then there are other situations where we are trying to bring equity between cancer patients and non-cancer patients, or as I mentioned, gender or height disparity. And it's been 5 or 10 years, and the policy either has not changed or has made only a half step going forward. So I would say, generally speaking, policy changes tend to be very, very deliberate, very slow. They require a lot of support and consensus. And it's very, very difficult to change something incumbent unless there is some kind of a crisis that the whole community either agrees there is to it, or in the case of liver transplantation, out, like a lawsuit against the system. And so one of the things I've learned in the policy space is you need incredible patience and expect, in spite of all the work, that perhaps nothing will change.
Yeah, I guess my only comment that I'll add on top of that is that I think the issue is exactly what Sridhar is saying, in that the policies take too long to change, rather than they're changing so rapidly that they outpace the innovation that you're trying to implement. It's one of the problems with healthcare. It's also one of the barriers to entry. You have to have the capital and the expertise and the time to be able to implement changes like this that can be transformative.
And related to this policy issue, I mean, one of the audience, one of the alumni actually sent us a question. We know we have experienced COVID situation, which we are still experiencing, but FDA and then CDC work really hard to expedite some of these approval process. So the question from the alumni is, will we approve more drugs per year as we went through this process? What is your thought? And maybe a related question is, another alumni question is, with the speeding up of innovation, where do you see disruption for pharma companies?
I think it depends on who you ask about the FDA speed up. I mean, there are people who believe that the old FDA was so slow that the speed up is bringing them to normal, right? So that's one group of people who believe that the FDA may be too conservative, or they require too much data. On the other hand, you say, but they are the organization that people believe in. And if people lose trust that the FDA is not doing a thorough job, then just because you approved a vaccine doesn't mean you're going to take it, because people are going to say, well, I don't know. These guys seem to have hastily approved it under political pressure. So again, I think some of these regulatory bodies are in a somewhat no-win situation. They're too quickly or too fast. One of the good things that has happened, and it's actually a very nice work that Zach, again, Andrew and I and Kira and all did, is called drug repurposing, right? So I think pretty much one of the last things that President Obama did, I think it was approved in December 2016 or something like that, was the fact that there would be a much faster FDA approval process if a drug is already approved for condition A, and you want to use observational and retrospective data analysis to pitch it for problem B, okay? Because we know it is safe. So since the safety aspect was already done, now the question is only one of efficacy, right, of at a different level. I think it is a 2016 and 2017 FDA rule that allowed for much faster and a much less cumbersome process and very data driven, by the way, to get these kind of drug repositioning approvals going. So that could be an example where regulatory, I'll call it innovation, has been well received, I think, both by the pharma companies and I would think from the patients, because the underlying fear of toxicity is not there, right? And so it's now a matter of only proving kind of the efficacy. So I think there are those kinds of changes that have happened in the last 4 or 5 years that could be also beneficial in getting a little bit more of kind of the drugs to the market.
Yeah, I think on the topic of machine learning too, there's lots of opportunities and there's a lot of groups out there working on clinical study support tools and approaches that will impact the speed of approval of new drugs, right? And the efficacy of that process. And we're so early on in that process that I suspect we haven't seen any of the impact of that yet, but we will, right? As those studies come to fruition, we're going to see that process accelerate.
Yeah, I don't want to give a plug to my colleagues at MIT, but my good friend co-authored a different paper, and his PhD students actually did what you just mentioned, Will. They looked at thousands of published papers in various journals and clinical studies and built an efficient frontier and said which drugs, no point testing going through this in clinical trials. That is, they're helping pharmaceutical companies prioritize which drugs and which drug combinations on which patients and are worth doing, so that for a given amount of money and time, the probability of success is very high. So it is kind of helping the very process of kind of the drug discovery, right? I think that's where you're going with this, and they're basically using. A lot of the stuff the PhD students had to do was to take PDF documents in hundreds of journals and code it into a spreadsheet, type it the baby, and set it up in a way, because machine learning needs data in the somewhat semi-structured form, actually, before it goes there. And so, and then start running this kind of analysis and then say, I think they went to a couple of large pharma companies and said, tell me what are the 10 things you're going to be trying. And they ran it very quickly and came and said, don't even try these 7 things. The likelihood that they will succeed is lower than, let's say, this threshold. At least deprioritize them, right? So I think if we are able to use some of that to improve the efficiency of the drug discovery, hopefully the time to get new drugs and proving that to the FDA and the total cost of it, which again, gets back to how much is out of pocket versus insurance, all will get improved. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That is an example of machine learning actually improving the very process of clinical trials and therefore drug discovery.
Right. And the question also referenced COVID, and not to take this in a different direction, but the impact of COVID, I think, will have long-standing impact on our healthcare industry, right? Telemedicine, Teladoc, Lemonade, there's a whole bunch of telemedicine companies, Soo-Haeng is a tiny sliver of those, that are transforming the way healthcare not only is received by the patient, but delivered by the provider, right? Because people want to work differently also. They don't necessarily want to go into a clinic or an office. They want to be able to provide that care from their home, kind of like we're providing this webinar, right? And those impacts from COVID, I think we'll continue to see the impact of the work process changes that have come from this for the rest of our lives throughout healthcare.
Already, I think before COVID, there was a move away from this monolithic big hospital, providing as the majority. I mean, a lot of the stuff was getting out into outpatient retail clinics, to urgent care centers, into Walgreens. I mean, so stuff that, a long time ago would have been in your pediatrician's office, you can get in Walgreens, right? And so
Right.
I think the retailization, if that is really a word or not, was going on even before COVID. And I think again we are seeing the same pressures. I'm sure UPMC is saying it, and other healthcare systems are saying it. This idea that all the doctors and the patients all will come to one big building and find difficulty in parking and stuff like that. But I think that's going to go away, except for those that really require some serious multi-day staying, and everything is getting basically out into the malls or into kind of retail, and to the extreme case, obviously, as you said, with wearable devices collecting more information. You're doing home care, people coming to your home to do things, or providing things via telemedicine. The fraction of actual healthcare provision in this centralized model of, let's say, 30 years ago is probably going to get eroded as time goes by.
Totally agree.
Okay, so our conversation today has progressed quickly, so we have only a couple of minutes remaining. So as a final thought, each panelist can briefly tell us, any final thought about this future of healthcare, and then, or your experience as a faculty, especially at TEPR, cross-campus collaboration at CMU is also a valuable component. So any final thought, any experience you have as a CMU faculty?
Well, as I'm going to put my entrepreneurship professor hat on for a moment. My students often ask the question, what's the next big transformative movement or technology that's going to change the world like the internet did, right? And my answer is AI and machine learning, right? And I would predict that it's going to take a little bit longer than we all think it will, because of all the issues we've discussed in the last hour, but its effect is going to be absolutely profound. And in 20 years, it's going to be amazing how different things are because of these technologies, and it will accelerate over that period.
Yeah, I think mobile devices, wearables, iPhones. I mean, a lot of this, individualized data collection sources. I think they have been catching on, but maybe only a sliver of the population of the youthful and the fit, maybe. But if as that generation grows older and the future generations come in, to add on to where is the data coming from which you can do ML or AI. I think this will be automatically collected. If you have your phone in your pocket, it'll probably tell you how many steps you walked, right? It'll probably tell you how well you slept, and things of that type, right? And so a lot of the individualized data that might be required for high fidelity as well as personalized response is capable of getting collected. Now the question is how widespread will it be, and will somebody then capitalize on this data and provide useful services.
Thank you. Thea, any quick final thought?
Sir, last minute. Yeah, I mean, I think there's. It's interesting to reflect on, if the future of the healthcare, and I think with ML and AI, of all the potential ethical, social issues of equity, and making sure the data is representative, and the quality. As I'm hearing my fellow panelists talk, I immediately start thinking of, if we have a lot more data on certain kinds of groups, certain kinds of people in certain environments, and how that will play out, and how this interface of humans being, in our own judgment about the quality of the data, the decisions, and this will be a challenge to best use these tools in a way that really elevates healthcare, and how can we do that in a way where we sort of leveraging the both of technology as well as the best of humans. Yeah, it's an exciting future to be a part of. Thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you. So I'd like to thank the 3 faculty members for sharing their insightful thoughts with us today. I also like to thank the audience for listening to our conversation and also asking very good questions. Although we didn't have time to get to all the questions, I hope you can also send your emails to these faculty members for further interaction. So now I'd like to pass the floor to John for closing.
Well, thank you, Professor Cho, and for all of our professors. Very impressive discussion today. Fascinating. So much happening, and very excited that so much is happening here at the Tepper School through this initiative and in our cross-campus collaboration. So thank you for joining us today. We will be sending you a follow-up email on how you could become engaged with this important initiative, ideas and thoughts that you might have, how you might want to communicate with our faculty members and share your insights with them, or perhaps questions you have that they could answer at another time. But thank you so much for joining us. We're always glad to have you back here in our virtual classroom at the Tepper School. Thank you to our students and alumni and all those who joined us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.